When an officer says step out, most people's brains go blank. Not because they're guilty, not because they've done anything wrong, but because those two words trigger something primal. Something that bypasses logic and goes straight to the oldest part of your nervous system. The part that remembers what it felt like to be called to the front of the classroom. The part that remembers your father's voice when he used your full name. The part that knows without being told that something has just shifted. What would you do right now if someone knocked on your window and told you to get out of your own car? Pause for a second. Actually picture it. Your hands on the wheel. The blue and red lights still flashing in your side mirror. And that voice, calm, firm, unmistakable. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Most people think they'd stay calm. Most people think they'd comply politely and everything would be fine. But that's not what actually happens. And what you don't know about those two words could mean the difference between driving away in 10 minutes and spending the next 6 hours trying to explain something you never intended. Let me ask you something, and I really want you to think about it. Have you ever been told to step out of your car during a traffic stop? If yes, what did you do? If no, what do you think you would do? Drop your answer in the comments before we go any further, because I promise you by the end of this, your answer might change. Here's what most people get wrong. They hear step out, and they immediately assume the worst. They assume they're under arrest. They assume the officer has found something. They assume they've done something terrible without realizing it. And that assumption triggers a cascade of bad decisions, fumbling for paperwork they've already handed over, asking why 7 different ways, moving too fast, moving too slow, explaining, apologizing, making it worse. But here's the part nobody talks about. Most of the time when an officer tells you to step out, it's not because you're in trouble. It's not because they've decided to arrest you. It's because they're trying to keep both of you safe. Stay with me, because this next part matters more than anything else you'll hear today. I've spent hundreds of hours studying body cam footage, police procedure manuals, legal analyses, and first-hand accounts from both officers and civilians. And what I found surprised me. The step out command is one of the most misunderstood, over-feared, and consistently mishandled interactions in the entire legal system. And the difference between handling it well and handling it poorly comes down to one thing. Not your rights, not your tone, not whether you're guilty or innocent. It comes down to whether you understand what the officer is actually thinking in that moment. So here's the promise of this video. By the time you finish watching, you will know exactly why officers give this command, what they're looking for when you step out, the 3 mistakes that turn a routine exit into a nightmare, and the single most effective way to respond that almost nobody uses. You will understand this interaction better than 99% of drivers on the road, and you will never hear step out the same way again. Let's start with what's actually happening inside the officer's head. When you're sitting in your car during a traffic stop, you have one perspective. You're nervous, your heart is beating a little faster. You're trying to remember if you stopped at that stop sign completely or if it was more of a rolling situation. That's normal, that's human. But the officer has a completely different set of concerns. They're not just thinking about the traffic violation, they're thinking about weapons. They're thinking about concealed compartments. They're thinking about the last time an officer in their department got hurt during a stop exactly like this one. And here's the thing most drivers never realize. A vehicle is one of the most dangerous environments for a police officer to approach. Why? Because you're sitting in a 2-ton metal machine with multiple exits, blind spots, and plenty of places to hide things. The officer can't see your hands if they drop below the window line. They can't see your feet. They can't see what's on the seat next to you. Every traffic stop involves a fundamental imbalance of information. And step out is the officer's way of leveling that imbalance. But most people hear it differently. They hear accusation. They hear aggression. They hear, "I've already decided you're guilty." And that misunderstanding creates the exact kind of tension that makes officers the most nervous. Let me give you a real example. A few years ago, a driver in Ohio was pulled over for a broken taillight. Routine stop. Nothing special. The officer asked him to step out so he could conduct a quick pat-down for weapons before asking a few follow-up questions. The driver immediately got defensive. Started asking, "Why do you need me to get out?" Started recording on his phone without saying anything. Started arguing that he had rights, and he wasn't wrong. He did have rights. But here's what he didn't understand. The officer wasn't trying to violate his rights. The officer was following a safety protocol that had been drilled into him for years. And when the driver refused to step out, the situation escalated. More officers arrived. The driver was eventually removed from the car physically. He was charged with obstruction. Did he win that case? Eventually some charges were dropped. But he still spent a night in jail. He still had to hire a lawyer. He still went through 6 months of stress over a broken taillight. Now contrast that with another driver in Arizona. Same situation, broken light, asked to step out. This driver simply said, "Yes, sir," opened the door slowly, kept his hands visible on the steering wheel until the last possible second, and stepped out without a single argument. The officer did a quick pat-down, found nothing, asked 2 questions, and let him go in less than 8 minutes. 8 minutes. That's the difference. So what's the variable? It wasn't guilt. It wasn't race. It wasn't the officer's mood. It was the driver's response. One created friction. The other created cooperation. And before you say, but I shouldn't have to comply if I haven't done anything wrong, let me stop you right there. I'm not telling you to surrender your rights. I'm telling you to understand the difference between legal strategy and survival strategy. Those are not always the same thing in the moment. You can assert your rights later. You cannot unescalate a situation once it's already exploded. Here's what most people miss. When an officer says step out, they're not just asking you to exit the vehicle, they're running a diagnostic test. They're watching how you move, they're watching your hands, they're watching your face, they're listening to your first 3 words, and they're making a decision in real time about whether you're a threat or just a normal person having a bad day. This is where the psychology gets really interesting. Most people, when they're nervous, do one of 3 things. They freeze, they over-explain, or they get defensive. All 3 of these responses, ironically, look suspicious to an officer. Freezing looks like you're hiding something. Over-explaining looks like you're lying. Getting defensive looks like you have something to protect. None of these mean you're guilty. But all of them trigger the officer's training to slow things down, ask more questions, and not let you leave until they understand what's happening. The smart move? It sounds almost too simple, but here it is. Calm acknowledgement followed by deliberate, visible action. Let me break this down step by step, because the order matters more than the words. Step 1. When you hear step out, do not move immediately. That sounds counterintuitive, I know, but moving too fast is just as bad as moving too slow. Instead, take 1 second, 1 breath, and say something neutral like yes sir or yes ma'am. That single acknowledgement tells the officer you heard them and you're not going to argue. Step 2. Keep your hands on the steering wheel until you're ready to move. This is critical. The most dangerous moment in any traffic stop is when the driver's hands disappear. Officers are trained to watch for that. If your hands drop below the window line without explanation, their brain goes to a defensive place automatically. They can't help it. That's training. Step 3. Announce your movements. Say, I'm going to reach for the door handle now, or I'm going to open the door slowly. This sounds strange if you've never done it, but officers will tell you off the record that this single habit changes everything. It removes the guesswork. It tells them you're aware of their concerns, and it makes you look like someone who has nothing to hide. Step 4. When you open the door, do it with your left hand if you're in a left-hand drive country. Why? Because your right hand is the one that could theoretically reach for something. Keep your right hand visible on the steering wheel or on your leg as you exit. Then step out backward if possible, facing the officer, keeping your hands where they can be seen. Step 5. Once you're outside, ask 1 question, and only 1 question. What would you like me to do next? That's it. Not, why did you pull me over? Not, am I free to go? Not, what did I do? Those questions come later. Right now, your only job is to follow instructions clearly and calmly. This is the part where people mess up every single time. They try to negotiate from inside the car. They try to argue about the reason for the stop before they've even stepped out. And that tells the officer one thing. You're not listening. And if you're not listening to a simple command, what else aren't you going to listen to? Let me tell you about a case that changed how I think about this. A woman in Florida was pulled over for speeding. 15 over, not a huge deal. The officer asked her to step out. She was confused because she'd never been asked that before. But instead of arguing, she just did it. She stepped out, kept her hands visible, and waited. The officer explained that he wanted to ask her a few questions away from the traffic noise, and that he was also going to have a K9 unit walk around her car. She didn't panic. She didn't consent to a search verbally, but she also didn't refuse. She just said, okay, I understand. The dog didn't alert. The officer thanked her for her patience, and she drove away in less than 15 minutes. Later, she found out that the officer had been trained to look for signs of human trafficking. That's why he wanted her out of the car. He wasn't looking for drugs. He wasn't looking for warrants. He was looking for someone who might be in the back seat against their will. Her calm cooperation made it easy for him to do his job and let her go. Now imagine if she had refused. Imagine if she had started recording and demanding to know her rights. The officer would have had to treat that as suspicious behavior. The stop would have taken longer. The tension would have been higher. And for what? To prove a point that nobody was trying to take away in the first place. Here's the hard truth that very few people want to hear. Your rights are strongest when you're not actively fighting for them in the moment. That sounds backwards, I know, but think about it. If you comply with a lawful order to step out, and later you believe that order was unlawful, you have recourse. You can file a complaint, you can talk to a lawyer, you can watch the body cam footage. But if you resist in the moment, you've given the officer a new reason to detain you. Obstruction, failure to comply, resisting without violence. Those charges stick even when the original stop was questionable, and they turn a 15-minute inconvenience into a criminal record. I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying it because most people don't understand the math of risk. The risk of complying with a step-out order when you've done nothing wrong is almost zero. The risk of refusing is potentially catastrophic. And yet thousands of people every year choose the catastrophic path because they're reacting emotionally instead of strategically. So let me ask you again, what would you do? If you're like most people, your answer just changed. And that's good. That's the goal. Not to make you afraid of the police, not to make you think every officer is out to get you, but to give you a framework that works regardless of the situation. Good officer, bad officer. Clear violation, questionable stop. The framework works the same way. One more layer before we wrap this up, because this is the part that almost no one talks about. When you step out of the car, you are now in a different legal environment. Inside the car, you have enhanced privacy protections. Outside the car, those protections are weaker. Officers can pat you down for weapons if they have reasonable suspicion. They can ask you questions you don't have to answer. They can have a dog sniff the exterior of your car without a warrant. This is not a violation of your rights. This is how the law works. And knowing that should change how you behave. If you have nothing illegal in your car, you have nothing to worry about. Let the dog sniff. Let the officer ask questions. Answer briefly and honestly, or exercise your right to remain silent politely. Officer, I don't mean to be difficult, but I'd prefer not to answer questions without my lawyer present. That's a complete sentence. That's legal. That's protected. But notice what it doesn't do. It doesn't argue. It doesn't escalate. It just sets a boundary calmly and clearly. The worst thing you can do when you're outside the car is to become combative. Raise your voice. Use profanity. Gesture wildly. Take a fighting stance. All of those things give the officer legal justification to take control of the situation by force if necessary. And once that happens, the narrative is out of your hands. You are now the subject of a use of force report. You are now the person who became aggressive during a traffic stop. Even if you were completely calm before the command was given, that's not what the report will say. Here's the bottom line. When an officer says step out, they are not asking for your opinion. They are not starting a negotiation. They are giving you a lawful order that courts have consistently upheld as reasonable for officer safety. Your job is not to agree with it. Your job is not to like it. Your job is to execute it smoothly and then deal with the rest of the interaction one step at a time. Most people lose control of traffic stops because they try to control everything at once. They want to know why they were pulled over. They want to know how long it will take. They want to know if they're going to get a ticket. They want to know if they can refuse the search. They want to know 10 different things before they've even done the one thing they were asked to do. And that mental clutter creates physical hesitation. Physical hesitation creates suspicion. Suspicion creates longer stops. Longer stops create more opportunities for things to go wrong. The alternative is almost Zen-like in its simplicity. One thing at a time. First, step out. Second, keep your hands visible. Third, listen to the next instruction. Fourth, follow it. Fifth, wait. That's it. That's the whole strategy. It's not complicated, but it requires something most people don't have in the moment. Discipline. The discipline to set aside your ego. The discipline to delay your questions. The discipline to trust that the system, flawed as it may be, will give you a chance to speak later. And here's the final piece that I want you to remember long after this video ends. The way you respond to step out tells the officer more about you than any answer you could give to their questions. If you respond with calm, deliberate cooperation, you have signaled that you are a low-risk individual. If you respond with panic, aggression, or confusion, you have signaled the opposite. And once that signal is sent, it is very, very hard to unsend it. So the next time you see those lights in your rearview mirror, take a breath. Remember what you learned here. And when the officer says those two words, you'll know exactly what they mean. Not accusation, not a trap, not the end of the world, just a safety protocol. One that you can navigate with confidence, clarity, and control. What's your experience been with traffic stops? Have you ever been asked to step out? How did it go? Drop your story in the comments. I read as many as I can, and if you found this useful, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the more people understand this, the safer everyone becomes, including the person in the mirror.